Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Armenian News Network Groong Week in Review for May 25, 2028. We are recording this on May 28. Mais 28. Our guest today is Artur Khachatryan. He's a member of the Parliament of Armenia with the Hayastan Dashing Armenia Alliance. He's also a member of the Armenian Revolutionary Federation, ARF Dashnaksutyun.
And before we begin, folks, just a quick request. While Pashinyan is trying to ram through a new constitution, we're just trying to keep the lights on here at Groong. So help us by becoming a sustaining member or just buy us a coffee at podcast.groong.org/donate. And now, if your budget is as bleak as the Armenian Defense Department's, then you can help us by commenting, liking, and sharing our shows with your friends and enemies. Your activity goes a long way for us. Thank you very much. Mr. Khachatryan, welcome back to Groong. Nice to have you again.
Definitely.
Always pleasure.
So, happy Republic Day. We're recording this interview on May 28th, Republic Day, commemorating the first Armenian Republic that was founded in 1918. It was born from the ashes of the genocide and imperial collapse, and it was a moment of sovereignty and survival. Brief, but I think defining. And the ARF, the party you're a member of, led that government, and the legacy still looms large. I know a lot of the nation building that happened during those years was carried over to the new independent Republic of Armenia today. Now, in today's post-war Armenia, without Artsakh and facing external pressure and internal division, May 28 for us hits a little bit differently, unfortunately. And so I want to begin by asking you, as a member of the ARF, what does May 28 mean to you personally and politically? And can you provide your reflections on this day?
Well, yeah, today when there is nothing to be proud for, there's not too much festivity around anything at all. But nevertheless, we have to celebrate this holiday, National Day, the First Republic Day. And today at the memorial in Sardarabad, we had a very important memorial celebration. More than 50 people joined our party. And in all our speeches, we commemorated this holiday, this day, and also we stressed the significance of the day for the nation and for today. Well, yeah, the nation, the republic was born on the ashes of genocide, imperial collapse, when the Turkish army was few miles away from Yerevan, when out of 1 million people, from 300,000 to 500,000 were refugees. Poverty, diseases, local gangs, uprising of local Muslim groups. But Armenian nation, under the leadership of Armenian Revolutionary Federation, managed to create a state. And that state, that republic, was far more democratic than many countries on earth during that period of time, when European progressive parties and governments were fighting against the right of women to vote. In Armenia, from the very first day, women were allowed to participate in election. Armenian ambassador to Japan, I think, was the first ever female ambassador. Though my party, ARF, had the majority in all parliaments, we have always invited other smaller parties who join the government to have a consensus government while understanding that the situation is. So we understood the importance of national concord when the country was in trouble. The changes that happened were more significant than the changes we have in this republic during the last 35 years. And during the very first days, we opened university, schools, hospitals, and more importantly, there was social justice. No one was, of course, unfortunately, no one was rich, but in poverty, everyone was equal. And even one of the founding fathers of the republic passed away from typhoid because there was no medicine in the country. But he managed to sustain. Armenia's territory, when it was found, it was less than 12,000 square kilometers. We handed over the country to Bolsheviks when it was about 30,000 square kilometers. So it started on 12,000. I want to repeat this once more. And we handed it when it was 30,000 square kilometers. Plus, we have the Sèvres Treaty and the Wilson's verdict, or how it's called, I don't know, the arbitration on the borders of the Republic of Armenia, the western borders. It's altogether about 160,000 square kilometers.
And how would you contrast that with today, when political and territorial threats are looming, and the policies of the current, government, or what similarities and differences are there?
There are no well, there's only one similarity. The neighbors from east and west try to eliminate the country, try to annihilate the nation. That's the only similarity. Everything else is difference. Again, we started on 12,000 square kilometers. We handed to Bolsheviks 30,000 square kilometers. Pashinyan and his crew started when Armenia and Artsakh were 42,000 square kilometers. Now we have less than 28,500 square kilometers. We do not have democratic, shrinking every day. We do not have justice. We don't have democracy. We have the rich, very, very rich and very poor. When you walk in Yerevan, you can see Rolls Royces and Bentleys and Jaguars, and you can see people who have to walk on the Yerevan sun because they can't afford 150 drams to take a public transport. And we see institutions collapsing every day, misperforming every day, and we see out migration and shrinking population. We see despair, and we see people who have lost the faith in the future of this country. This is the most stunning differences between the Republic under Nikol Pashinyan and the First Republic.
I was just watching some of the programs on TV, and they're talking about I think that over in those 3 years, the Armenian parliament passed so many laws, and so many institutions were essentially built from scratch, and many of those became part of the when Armenia became part of the USSR. In one way or another, continued functioning, and I guess it was not a complete reformat of the country, and that allowed Armenia as a Soviet republic to function better, I think. There's also a lot of talk about mistakes that were made, but I think today is one of those holidays that can be, people can feel proud about, because it allowed Armenia to survive. It allowed Armenia to continue living until today, and that was sort of the hope, and even the independence of the new Republic of Armenia directly refers to May 28, the Declaration of Independence.
Absolutely. Look at this, okay? Imagine there was no republic. Look, let's go back 107 years ago these days, okay? Armenians from Western Armenia found refuge in East Armenia. Turkey is advancing to annihilate the nation. If we lost in Sardarabad, Garakilisa, Bashaparan, and in Sarnakh, what would happen? Physically, the people would be destroyed. So no Armenians may be alive, okay? Maybe, scattered everywhere around the world without any institutions to have them, to unite them. Another scenario, okay? Well, the physical security was sort of ensured. I don't know why, but imagine, okay? Physical security was ensured, but no republic was created. Like Armenians found refuge in Azerbaijan or Georgia. This means that after Russians returned to this part of the world and Soviet republics were created, no Armenian Soviet republic would be created. In the best case, it would be an autonomous region, either in Georgia or the worst case in Azerbaijan. So no Soviet Armenia. If there's no Soviet Armenia, I think no one has any illusions that today's Armenia would be created. Okay, maximum Abkhazia or South Ossetia.
Arthur, you said imagine this situation, but we don't really have to imagine it. Look at Artsakh, right?
Well, absolutely.
It became an autonomous region, and where is it now? There are no Armenians, and that would be Armenia today.
No, that's true. You look at Artsakh, look at Nakhichevan. Okay. So if not the First Republic, we wouldn't have Soviet Republic, we wouldn't have the Third Republic. And you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. The Bolsheviks, the communists, understood that they were functioning institutions, and they didn't demolish them. The same actually happened back in 1990, 1991, when the authorities of the newly independent Armenia understood the value of institutes of Soviet Armenia and understood the value of the cadre of people who used to work at these institutions. So there was no total nihilism, unlike Nikol Pashinyan, who came to crush everything, who came here to discredit everyone. Okay, so there was a sort of solidarity, continuity. What he did, he tried to cut every links. He tried to discredit everything that was in Armenia before 2018. And as a result, you see what's going to happen, what happened. Yeah. Artsakh, and now the situation in Armenia, when Pashinyan, had to beg Aliyev to come and have coffee with him. When he's openly humiliated by Aliyev and by Erdogan. And yet you have to run to grab an umbrella to keep it, for Macron to have a chance to talk to him. You also talk about mistakes. Of course, there were mistakes, because when the Republic in 1918 was created, there were no public servants, there were no statesmen, there were either intellectuals like Avetis Aharonyan, Levon Shant, Nicola Abalian, or were just revolutionaries and freedom fighters. Of course, there were mistakes, but fundamentally, the country was on right rails.
Okay, moving to our first topic. Arthur, last week, Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov visited Yerevan and called for a reformatting of Armenian-Russian relations. Armenia's Foreign Minister Mirzoyan immediately objected to the need for change, insisting that relations are fine. At the same time, government officials claimed Armenia has not started the negotiation process on EU membership, despite the parliament, led by the ruling Civil Contract Party, passing a law to launch EU accession. And we think that these mixed signals deepen questions about Armenia's foreign policy directions. So that's why you are here, to help us understand, why did the Armenian approve a law and the parliament then voted to begin EU accession, and Foreign Minister Mirzoyan denies the plans?
Well, I think on your show, on your program, I've said that this law on accession, the law is in parentheses, has internal agenda only, because on the same day when this law was deliberated on the floor of the parliament, the co-rapporteur, Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs, said, yeah, of course, the law says that we are starting the process, but we are not going to apply for membership. So the law is on the process, but there is no process to follow. Okay, the law has passed about 2 months ago, and I don't know whether we are closer to EU by an inch. Not, of course. So the issue is the following. The Republic Party, that is led by brother of Vazgen Sarkisian, who was actually a prime minister under Robert Khachatryan, and he headed the Republican government, actually. So he was a classical ex. But anyway, if not them, then Pashinyan and Armenian wouldn't manage to take grip of Yerevan. So this was a pure blackmailing, and Sargsyan actually positions himself as a pro-Western political force. So he blackmailed Pashinyan. Mm-hmm. If not this law, he would withdraw his support to Armenian, and Yerevan would collapse. Losing Yerevan and without Gyumri 1 year before the elections can be a real problem for Pashinyan. That's why he gave in and they passed this law, even though a few days before the vote, they withdrew this draft from the committee. Remember that. They withdrew that, and something happened between Sargsyan and Pashinyan, so they returned it back. So when Lavrov was here and Mirzoyan was asked about going to Europe, he says, no, we do not have any plans of doing so. But what Pashinyan's government does is a very risky game, okay? You cannot I don't want to say, two masters, but you cannot pray to two gods, okay? You have to make up your mind. Complementarity is okay. Armenia's government, starting from 1990, from LTP, Levanter Petrosian times, was running a complementary foreign policy. Good relations with the West, good relations with the Russia, but of course understanding the role of Russia in the region, because Armenia had good relations with Russia. These people do not understand these things. They think they can cheat both the Russians and the West, and this will not yield to a positive result.
Well, complementarity for these people seems to be to say whatever the power in the room is, so that they leave
Absolutely.
without horrible results.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And like 15 minutes later, they can contradict themselves.
Exactly. So when they talked about this term, which is kind of new to me, reformatting relations, Lavrov said it, and then Mirzoyan rejected. I don't understand what that means. What does it mean to reformat relations or ties?
Well, this is funny, of course, because when you look at the rhetoric by the Armenian officials, of course, to please the West, they are not very friendly with Russia, let me say it this way. Even though only 4.5% of Armenian exports are bound for Europe, and they understand that if not trade with Russia, Armenia's economy would collapse. But anyway, few people, especially the Speaker of the Parliament, look at their language. So the Russians have a room for concern, of course. Mirzoyan tried to dismiss that, saying that no, everything is okay. But obviously, not everything is okay. Armenia even a couple of times boycotted the meetings of foreign ministers in Russia. They didn't go, when, especially in 2022-23, when Azerbaijan has sieged Artsakh, and they knew that they had to talk to Azerbaijan, they had to talk to Russia to try to lift the blockade, to lift the siege, but they didn't go there. So saying that everything is okay is obviously a very deep distortion of the truth.
Right.
So instead of understanding that something is out of joint, they try to say no, everything is fine. And actually, Mirzoyan says everything is fine, but the day after, Artsakh Hovhannisyan, the official representative of Ministry of Defense during the war, so basically the
Mr.
cheat number one,
Hakhteluyank.
the cheat number one of this country, on a public television, he says, well, if Germany won the World War II, it would be better for Armenia. And after that, can you imagine that relations between Armenia and Russia are good? No, of course.
Yeah, ridiculous. So overall, what are your impressions of Lavrov's visit to Yerevan, and what's your assessment of the current state of our ties, in your view?
Well, I think Lavrov came here to deliver a message that the key to normalization of the situation in this region is in Russia. Russia is ready to provide platform for negotiations between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and the settlement shall be based on the three trilateral statements signed by Putin, Pashinyan, and Aliyev. I think this was the major message. The other message was that, okay, if you want to go to EU, you can go to EU, but you cannot be member of EU and you cannot be a member of Eurasian Economic Union simultaneously. So you have to leave Eurasia to go to Europe, and everyone understands what would be the result of this shift. And surprisingly, from Lavrov, we knew that Armenia was going to host the European civilization, how it's called, the civilization.
Political community, EPC?
Yep, in spring 2026, right before the elections, I assume. So Pashinyan says that their government is transparent, they don't have anything to hide from own people. But we know from Aliyev, from Azerbaijan, that the text of this so-called peace treaty is ready. And we know from Lavrov that Armenia is going to host this event, which is ridiculous, hilarious.
Yeah.
And actually, another interesting point, during the joint press conference, Lavrov said, what was the deal about Nagorno-Karabakh? That the issue, the political settlement, is left to the future generations. This means the issue of political status of Nagorno-Karabakh is not off from negotiation table, and this issue still has to be resolved based on the documents that have adopted or based on the Lavrov plan, basically.
Yeah.
And it was Pashinyan and his people who kicked this issue out of the negotiation table. And Mirzoyan was standing next to Lavrov, and he didn't object him.
Right.
Yeah.
Arthur, now we need an Armenian government that is more Armenian than the Russians.
Well, more Armenian than the Russians, more Armenians than the Swiss, more Armenian than the French. Well, this government tries to be more Azeri than Azerbaijan, more Turkish than the Turks.
Yeah, can I just also mention, you mentioned the European political community. Well, that was the exact forum in October 2022 when Pashinyan went to Prague and declared that Artsakh is part of Azerbaijan. This was, according to the Russian government and the Russian foreign minister, this was one of a complete surprise, and this was when things were changed in Lavrov's term forever, but I don't think it will be forever. And as an Armenian, I cannot accept that. A few other things I noticed when with Lavrov's visit was that he wasn't greeted at the airport. It was a very lukewarm reception, and also unlike foreign visits of previous years, many visits before, the Russian officials didn't visit Tsitsernakabert or the Armenian Genocide Memorial. So I think that's a reflection of recent Pashinyan policy where they have taken that out of the diplomatic protocol, but that's maybe not related to Russia specifically.
Well, yeah, you are right. He was not received at the airport, greeted at the airport on the same level. I mean, the Minister of Foreign Affairs was not there. But let me remind you that I think it was in 2019 when Russia's President Putin arrived in Armenia, his car drove to the entrance of the presidential palace, and no one was there to greet him. And someone from the prime minister, from Pashinyan's protocol, was there. He basically said, okay, you go down the corridor, you turn left or you turn right, I don't know what. And after that, they just basically tried to blame Russia for not being respectful to Armenia, for not acting as an ally. Okay, so if that kind of a treatment, you cannot be very demanding from your partner. If you don't treat him like you treat a partner, what else are you expecting? You're right. Lavrov went to this eternal fire for the victims of or the heroes of the Second World War II. He didn't go to Tsitsernakabert, though I saw in the press that initially that was in the program. And today I saw in the press that there was a delegation from Poland that visited Tsitsernakabert, and there was no Armenian official, accompanying them.
Interesting.
So it's not surprising either because Pashinyan, Mirzoyan, Sinanian, they say that pursuing the genocide issue, adoption of fact of the genocide is not on their political agenda anymore. Having the world recognize, condemn genocide is not on their agenda anymore. They are building new Armenia. And the new Armenia that they have built so far is an Armenia where the children from elementary school were forced to swallow cocaine or other type of strong drug to cause drug addiction, so they can get money from their houses, pay for the drugs in the school. So you cannot imagine. No one could imagine that this could have happened like 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago, 50 years ago, 70 years ago. So this is the real Armenia that Pashinyan has created so far.
Okay, let's move on. We want to talk a little bit about the constitution, even though we've covered this before. So despite agreement on the draft peace deal text, Azerbaijan demands Armenia amend its constitution before signing it. This is one of the many preconditions or demands that Azerbaijan has placed, and the list continues to expand. Armenia says it's working on the changes to the constitution, but independent of Aliyev's demands. And Pashinyan on Monday went to greater lengths to prove his allegiance to Aliyev by stating that even if the Armenian Constitutional Court blocks the so-called peace deal, he will amend the constitution nevertheless. So I guess which one is first, the constitution or the prime minister who's supposed to follow the constitution? I basically want to know one simple thing. What is the mechanism by which Pashinyan intends to get the Armenian public to vote for a capitulative constitution, knowing full well that it's a national humiliation? How does Pashinyan envision accomplishing this act?
Well, this whole story about the constitution is very reflective of Pashinyan's policy, foreign policy, especially relations with Azerbaijan and with Turkey. Armenia was talking about changing amending constitution in early 2020, before the COVID, but it has nothing to do with the declaration of removing the reference to the Declaration of Independence from the preamble of the Constitution. When Azeris started talking that declaration has territorial claims against Azerbaijan, Pashinyan says he will take it out. Like real Armenia will be free from a burden of Artsakh, and he will take it off from the Constitution. But nevertheless, he said that the Constitutional Court says that only those items from the declaration that are explicitly embedded in the Constitution have legal force, legal effect. Everything else is just a declarative, beautiful statement. Azerbaijan's pressed further on. Moreover, they said that Armenia's constitution has to be changed not by the parliament, but by the referendum. So the Armenian people have to go to the polling stations and vote for the constitution, which is drafted in Baku, obviously, like the so-called peace treaty. And now Pashinyan was saying that the new constitution could be adopted in 2027. Then they moved it and said it would be amended by 2026. Now he sent a message saying that he is even willing to have the new constitution adopted even before the elections. I don't know how they are going to manage that given the very low rating that Pashinyan has, but nevertheless, my judgment is that it says that he might be even willing to have the new constitution adopted before the elections. Basically, all his policy is built on so-called peace treaty. I brought you peace. So now, if he does that, if he changes the constitution, he hopes that Azerbaijan would sign this document, this piece of paper. And he would go and say, people, I brought you peace. Now, if you want me to develop the peace, to have friendly relations with Azerbaijan, to open up new horizons for Armenia, vote for me. Vote for the new constitution. That is why he is ready to go to any concession to have this treaty signed. But Azerbaijan, they are not that naive. They put forward new demands. The return of 300,000 Azeris to something called West Azerbaijan. They call Armenia Western Azerbaijan. They want opening up the corridor that would link Nakhichevan to Azerbaijan. I'm sure they would ask for war criminals, i.e. the war heroes, to be handed over to Azerbaijan. And I don't know what new claims, new demands Azerbaijan would have. But they understand that any next government would be firmer than Pashinyan. That's why they want to squeeze as much concessions as possible. So this is why, even though the document on the table is capitulative in its nature, they don't even want to sign that, demanding more and more concessions from Pashinyan.
So what is the mechanism? I mean, when he says that he will, nevertheless, if the Constitutional Court blocks the so-called peace deal, he will nevertheless amend the Constitution to push it through. What is the mechanism by which he envisions it? Because besides a constitutional referendum, how else can he accomplish it? I just don't even understand the mechanism by which he's proposing to do this.
Well, I think he would, you know, what he means going to constitutional referendum, because the changes Aliyev demands cannot be done by the parliament.
Right.
They want basically a new constitution, and the new constitution cannot be adopted by the parliament. So
Okay.
that's why I think he would call for a constitutional referendum, and he would blackmail the public, saying that if you vote, you either vote for the new constitution or a new war will break up.
Yeah.
And Aliyev, in his turn, will support this idea with firing at the borders. So Pashinyan would say how long we want this to continue. Let's go and vote for a new constitution. Let's go and vote for peace instead of war. Artsakh has never been Armenian. The issue of genocide was exaggerated. Remembers the statements at the parliament that basically the Soviet Union brought this issue on the agenda only after Turkey joined NATO. It would be better if Soviet Union lost a war, all this kind of a crap to get these desirable results.
Anyway, it's very interesting because even with that, essentially they're expecting Armenians under the threat of violence to show up in big enough numbers at the polling station to constitute quorum and pass a constitutional referendum, which is, I don't know if has been done before, but in a state that is similar to Armenia. I mean, maybe if it was Japan or Germany after World War II, when they were completely devastated, maybe people would have, out of no choice, would have. But I know many people in Armenia who would, balk at this proposition. But anyway, as Armenia approaches the 2026 elections, political factions are split on how to, the opposition especially, on how to effect regime change. The ruling civil contract party aims to stay in power, as you said, by pushing through a pro-Azeri constitution to secure a so-called peace treaty with Aliyev. Meanwhile, the two main opposition blocs, Hayastan Dashing, of which the ARF is a member of, and Parti Vunem, I think disagree on strategy. So Hayastan Dashing favors running in the elections, with their leader Robert Khachatryan saying he is ready to return to power, while Parti Vunem pushes for Pashinyan's removal before then, including through impeachment. Now, before I ask you the questions, I have to say that it's a Sarah Sarkisian brings up a valid point that between now and elections in 2026, many bad things can happen to Armenia, including ceding new land, new territories to Azerbaijan, the constitution, as you mentioned. So that's why it's a little bit interesting to hear this oppositional fight come up. And meanwhile, while this group Artunem is trying to push Hayastan Dashing members to support their impeachment effort, Edmund Marukyan has been nominated as a new prime minister
Cherry on the
candidate
block.
by this new party formed by ex-civil contract MPs, and is currently, I guess, visiting California and maybe campaigning here. I'm not sure. So, do you think impeachment and elections are mutually exclusive paths, or can't they both just move forward at the same time? And why are we having this divisive debate between two opposition factions right now?
Well, to start with, we have never said that we won't be doing anything before the elections. We've mentioned that since right after the elections, we said that removing Pashinyan from office shall be done through joining parliamentary and extra parliamentary forms of opposition. So parliament plus street. And since 2022, when the first mass protests, the so-called the resistance movement started, we were at the parliament, in the parliament, and we were on the streets. The same was in 2023 when the solemn struggle or Davush for Armenia started. So we are combining parliamentary and extra-parliamentary forms of struggle. Being in the parliament is no harm from the street movement. Just the opposite. It fuels the street movement. That's to start with, okay? So we have never said that only the elections. We said everything possible that's not illegal, including elections and including peaceful protests on the street.
And
So
including
this is our,
impeachment?
including impeachment. Okay,
Okay.
now let's go to impeachment. Impeachment has a very interesting peculiarity.
And
Okay,
also,
it's
like, I
not
just want to mention, sorry, we say impeachment. I think that I really dislike the use of this term. It is a vote of no confidence.
true.
Let's,
It's not a, yes, it's vote of no confidence, but it has a very it's a very specific instrument. Okay, 54 members of parliament have to vote for the new candidate, for a new prime minister, not a new prime minister, but suggested or nominated prime minister. So basically, it's not the public who will vote during the general elections for a candidate, but the existing parliament has to vote. So 54 members of this parliament. We have 28 MPs. The with honors has 6 MPs. This makes 34 MPs. So are they sure that they can get signatures from 20 members of civil contract party? We don't think so. We haven't seen any member of the civil contract party saying that he is or she is willing to defect from civil contract party. Other than that, okay, there is an initiative group, I'm Awake, Artunam. They send us letters. I've received this letter. It has references to the legislation. I know this legislation better than they do. They say that the government is not legitimate anymore because they have neglected their electoral promises. That's what we are saying since 2022, when the first annual report on program execution was discussed on the floor. And other than that, I haven't seen at least 6 signatures under this document. If the with honors faction says they are ready to, it's even to go with impeachment, then the logic says that a document with 6 signatures shall be somewhere around. Without strong pressure from the street, I don't think that this parliament will be voting to oust Pashinyan from the office and appointing a new prime minister. So this is why we say we need to generate strong pressure first, because if we fail tomorrow on the 29th of May, till the 29th of November, we cannot start another round. We cannot attempt a new impeachment. Okay. This is the story. We need to do our homework because we don't see that there is enough pressure on the street. And other than that, there is no candidate that 20 people from civil contract would defect. This is the story. And it is very dishonest and unfair saying that Armenia faction is against impeachment. No, Armenia faction is not against impeachment. Armenia faction says that unfortunately today we do not have preconditions, necessary preconditions for this process to succeed.
Speaking about the 2026 elections, is the ARF planning to participate in the 2026 elections, and will it remain part of the Hayastan Dashing or Armenia Alliance, or go its own way? But there have been some speculative rumors in newspapers that the ARF might split from Armenia Alliance.
Well, ARF has participated in all parliamentary elections except 1995, when the party was banned by Levanter Petrosyan. As a political party, we don't see that there is any logic of boycotting elections. A serious party with serious ambitions cannot boycott, neglect elections. Regarding the format of the will we go with Armenia alliance, with the Armenia alliance? The format of the Armenia alliance itself will be changed. No one knows. This shall be decided by the Supreme Assembly of the party. It was a decision of the Supreme Assembly of the party of 2021, which basically instructed the executive body of the party to work on establishing an alliance with President Khachatryan and to participate in the elections in the electoral bloc alliance. So this is the situation. And I don't know how people today can say ARF will go with Armenia alliance or without Armenia alliance when ARF is actually part of Armenia alliance. So again, I want to repeat this once again. Everything will be decided by the Supreme Assembly of the party. So today, we do not have any issues with our partners in Armenia alliance. We work in perfect concord and harmony.
Okay. Mr. Khachatryan, Monte Melkonian famously said, if we lose Artsakh, we will turn the last page in our history. Today, with Artsakh lost, at least temporarily, and Armenia in deep political crisis, his words feel less like a warning and more like a reckoning. In an interview with us, one of our guests, Levon Zurabian, and I hope I'm not misrepresenting the context, he said that closing the page on Artsakh, which is part of the Armenia Alliance or Hayasan-Dashing agenda, or not closing it, when translated to ordinary language, would mean problems and probably even resumption of war with Azerbaijan. Do you agree with such statements? And what does closing the page or not closing the page of Artsakh mean today?
Well, no, I don't agree with Zurabian, neither with Mr. Zurabian, nor with Nikol Pashinyan and Civil Contract Party that say that if we don't forget about Artsakh, if we raise this issue, if we even pronounce the word Artsakh, if we say that the people of Artsakh have the right of collective return and they have the right to decide on their own political future, is a casus belli. No, because from the last 5 years, we see that Azeri's hostile rhetoric, Azeri's intentions to lose Armenia, to deprive Armenia of its sovereignty, the intentions of Azerbaijan to violate Armenia's territorial integrity have not diminished at all. Azerbaijan is more aggressive than it was when Artsakh was still there. So all those who say by sacrificing Artsakh we can save Armenia are absolutely wet and worthless, are wrong. Armenia with Artsakh is much stronger than Armenia without Artsakh. And this is not theory. This is what the situation on the ground in the region shows. This government, Pashinyan, says we have closed the Artsakh page. What was the reaction from Azerbaijan? Now 300,000 Azeris have to return. Now you have to give us a corridor. Now you have to change your constitution. Now you have to change your coat of arms. Now you have to pay reparations to Azerbaijan. So this statement, this kind of propaganda by Pashinyan and by Zurabian is very, very risky and is not grounded in facts. It contradicts to what we see on the ground in the region today.
Arthur, one of the aspects going on right now is that Azerbaijan has been shooting at Armenian border villages almost daily for the past 2 months since March. And perhaps a lot of sides have become desensitized to it because it just become routine. The EU mission in Armenia, for example, does not even mention this constant state of border violence, terror at Armenian villages and things like that. In the past week, however, there have been statements from Iran and the US that point to international concern about a real invasion of Armenia by Azerbaijan.
Mhm.
Iran just last week sternly reiterated its red line against any encroachment on its border with Armenia. And meanwhile, I think it was maybe about a week ago, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who is also the acting national security advisor to Trump, stated that the U.S. is trying to prevent an Azeri invasion of Armenia, which he sees as
This
a
is
real risk.
lightning and thunderstorm. Okay. Have you heard that? This is thunderstorm. This is not Azeri's aggression.
Well, we couldn't hear it,
Was
but
already
yeah,
Yerevan,
unfortunately, we didn't hear this, but it's appropriate for the moment, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, good.
Well, so the question is, how imminent is this threat of invasion, especially in light of about 2 weeks ago, Armen Grigoryan, who is the national security chairman in Armenia, and then yesterday, just yesterday, Alen Simonian stated that the risk of war is low. Is this cock going to crow a third time?
Let me tell you something. Armenia's ambassador in the United States, Lilith Makuns, who was the head of My Step faction, Nikol Pashinyan's faction, exactly 1 week before the war started, said that Turkey will not intervene if war starts. And we saw that Turkey intervened. Moreover, we see Turkey managing the war, managing the Azeri army. Now, when they say there is no risk of new war, I remember the words of Lilith Makuns and other members of the faction. There is an imminent risk of war. In 15 minutes, maybe a war can start. And the new normal that we have on our borders basically means that Azerbaijan has unrest on the borders permanently to justify its aggression against Armenia, saying that we cannot tolerate 2 months of provocation on our borders. And today, Armenia, and I'm very surprised that instead of getting ready for the war, not starting a war, the Armenian officials try to cheat the public, saying that there is no risk of war. I understand why they do that. If they say there is a threat of a new war, this means they will confess that all their policy of peace, in parentheses, has failed. All the concessions were in vain, were useless. Moreover, they have provoked the appetite of Azerbaijan. This is the situation on the ground.
Yeah, I guess when the time comes for a referendum on the constitution, the risk of war will suddenly rise exponentially.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
So is Armenia ready to repel an invasion if that were to happen?
I don't think so. That well, if properly managed, of course, Armenia can do that. Armenia has enough power to protect its borders. Even the Iranian ambassador that you mentioned a minute ago, about 6 months ago, said, "Why are you so unconfident in your army? Your army is able to protect its borders." But will Pashinyan be ready to protect the borders, or Pashinyan will be ready to surrender more parts from Armenia to Azerbaijan to justify its cause for capitulation that he presents as peace? Okay, if you agreed with me 6 months ago, if we change the constitution, if we blah, 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 the new intervention wouldn't happen. So this is the story. Yes, the possibility is there, but I am not sure about the willingness of today's government.
Arthur, if a war were suddenly, an invasion of Armenia were to suddenly break out tomorrow, May 29, what could the U.S. do to help? What would the U.S. do to help?
I don't know. They tried to help us in 2020.
Well, that was
They
a lot
tried
of
to
press
broker-
releases and statements and good
They
feelings.
tried even to broker a ceasefire. This was, of course, the last days of President Trump, he had other important things to do before the elections, but nevertheless, they tried to broker ceasefire, they failed. I don't know what will happen today if the war starts. The Europeans top, the top foreign affairs person, Kaya Kallas, visits Azerbaijan, ignores Armenia. Ursula von der Leyen says Azerbaijan is a reliable partner in energy issues. Azerbaijan will host this European Political Committee meeting, I think, in 2028. So I don't think that the West has enough leverage, efficient and effective leverage, to press on Azerbaijan to stop the war.
Yeah, I
That's the
think you're
situation.
absolutely right. I concur with you. Especially Europe, which is too dependent on Russian gas. That's going through Azerbaijan right now, as a matter of
Sure,
fact.
sure,
Yeah.
of course. You see Italy, is Azerbaijan's number one ally in Europe because they depend on Azeri gas,
Yeah.
Azeri and Russian gas.
All right. For the sake of time, I'm going to wrap us up, Arthur. It's time for me to ask both of you for some thoughts that you want to share with our audience. Let me first go to Hovik because I hadn't given you enough time to think about that. Hovik, what do you want to share? What's on your mind?
Well, the political commentary news this week was filled with those images of La Présidente of France being apparently slapped by a hand out of the airplane, which may or may not have been his second half. So, you know what? Good. I mean, people ask us why we are so against EU and France. I'm not personally against EU and France. Again, we are for balanced relations with all powers. But I'm really happy to have seen Macron get bitch slapped because for me and many Armenians, he'll always be remembered for his double talk, supporting Armenia verbally, but working to close the page on Artsakh. As one of the leading EU states, he represents an organization, as our guest said, that is Azerbaijan's first trading partner and the biggest export and import market for the dictatorship in Baku. Macron is the chief instigator of Pashinyan's Prague statement, where the trader recognized Artsakh as part of Azerbaijan in exchange for illusory support from the EU. And Macron is the chief instigator behind pitting Armenia against Russia as a so-called buffer. So you know what? F you, Macron.
Okay.
Well, I want to remind that these days, Armenia hosts Yerevan Dialogue, which is basically sort of a TEDx with lots of people from overseas and pretty important people actually. And in his address, I don't know why he spoke English when the official language is Armenian. He and Mirzoyan spoke English, and he didn't mention about Artsakh at all, and he didn't even mention about Armenian prisoners in Baku, which basically shows that Pashinyan is willing to do nothing to bring them home, and possibly he's even happy. I have a gut feeling that he is happy that they are behind the bars in Baku, because if they were in Armenia, they would tell what happened in Artsakh 2 days before Azeri's intervention, invasion in Artsakh, what happened in Artsakh during the 44-day war, and what happened with the negotiation process when Pashinyan assumed the power. So this is the kind of a leadership we have in Armenia these days.
Thank you, Arthur. All right. Thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate your time and your insight. We'll talk to you soon.
Pleasure is all mine. Talk to you soon.
Okay, Hovik, time to talk a little bit since Arthur just dropped out. So it's time for the kitchen sink, which we're test driving a little bit and figuring out what we're doing. I'm glad he mentioned, I'm glad his final thoughts were about the Yerevan Dialogue thing, because that was one of the topics we had to talk about together. What are your impressions of this Armenian TED Talk?
I haven't watched much of it, but I did peruse their agenda. And basically, the invitees to the event seem to have a heavy pro-EU bias, and essentially members of the NGO community, and also everyone in the top nomenclature of civil contract. I just want to mention a few of these speeches or sessions. One is, should EU enlargement be made easier? So that was one of the concerns at this summit. Another session was titled Europe's Future Amidst American Ambivalence. Here we have Marco Rubio saying that they're working to prevent an Azerbaijani attack against Armenia. And at this forum, they're saying America is ambivalent. I think this is all mixed in with the agenda of the war in Ukraine. And
one of the things I think about Marco Rubio's statement is, are they worried about Armenia, or are they worried about this invasion happening during Trump's watch? Because Trump, as we know, is trying very hard to go for a Nobel Peace Prize, the same as Pashinyan, I guess, and they just don't want it to happen in the next 4 years. After that, yeah, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, neither I think EU or US could care if Armenia is wiped off the map, unfortunately. There are some neighbors of Armenia that would care, but it's just interesting that a week after, all the ministers stood stood in a row and said, "No, sir, we're not going. We're not initiating EU discussions. No, we're not initiating EU discussions." And then the week after, they hold an EU meeting filled with agendas that are what we talked about. Anyways, it was
Yeah.
pretty funny.
What's funny is that we also had the EPC on our list of topics to touch on. And
Yeah.
I mean, we realized we're not going to get to it, but it was mentioned. And
Yeah.
in fact, the interesting thing that was mentioned was in 2026, I guess, Armenia is going to host the EPC.
Yeah, and that was announced one day after Lavrov left.
Yeah.
So they said that Armenia will hold the next EPC summit in 2026. I think that's in the spring of 2026. It's interesting because last week, Hrant, our guest, said that he was not very confident that the EU would give this gift to Armenia.
But
And
obviously they see it's important because that'll help Pashinyan get elected, maybe. But
yeah.
to me, Hovik, I noticed also that in 2028, it's very likely it's going to go to Azerbaijan. Now, whatever happens with Armenia and stuff like that, I think that holding the EPC in Azerbaijan in 2028 just legitimizes that dictator.
Like we said, for Azerbaijan, EU is the largest trading partner. Kaya Kallas didn't even bother to mention prisoners or anything critical when she ignored Armenia and flew over Armenia to visit Baku. So what can we expect?
Yeah.
So let's talk about something we didn't have time for last week, which was the mayor of Vagharshapat, Diana Gasparyan, resigned following a deadly shooting at a gas station tied to her family. The shooting victim had a prior dispute with Gasparyan's husband, who is also a member of the Vagharshapat's council. So it's a family business being in elections and I guess owning businesses together. So authorities searched their home during the investigation. Gasparyan stated that she was unaware of the incident details and her husband has not commented publicly. To me, I mean, Pashinyan basically campaigned on speeches against cronyism and corruption. And we here have examples of both corruption and cronyism here in one case. I mean, it's not the isolated case. We talked about the beating of journalist Artur Chahoyan right in the district office of the Nornork district in Yerevan. But it just exposes how hollow Pashinyan's anti-corruption promises are and Pashinyan's reliance on loyalists like Gasparyan. And Gasparyan is interesting because she, shortly after the war, leaked audio was leaked. I think it was done by Alain Simonian specifically, or someone in the civil contract. It was between her and Alain Simonian, and she was complaining that Pashinyan is crazy and she's going to resign, and Alain Simonian was trying to convince her to not resign. Of course, Gasparyan also is one of the members of the revolution of Nikol Pashinyan. So when the 2018 coup or revolution happened, They also forced the mayor of Vagharshapat at that time, Mehmet Grigoryan's son, to resign, and she basically took the mantle from him. So this is, I guess, some kind of a, yeah, definitely not good PR, and signals deep rot in the Pashinyan government, unfortunately, which they cannot hide.
Well, the way you're describing how all these things are happening, all this corruption, and the corruption that Pashinyan had said that he's going to uproot and get rid of and everything, it really signals that if it was a revolution, if this Velvet Revolution was a revolution, it's over, right?
It
It's
will never, yeah.
they've basically taken out the 65-year-old elite, they've replaced it with the 40, 45-year-old elite, and it's the same thing all over now. It's just nothing has changed except the names have changed a little bit. And the funny
And
thing
it's
is that
also,
there are a whole bunch of the 65-year-old elites still in parliament who are masquerading as MPs.
yeah, and they are unscathed. Like, they passed a new law to confiscate property from whose origin cannot be proven, which violates essentially, guilty unless innocent until you're proven guilty principle. So they're confiscating a lot of property belonging to the former regime, but all like Khachatryan Garzo
Yeah,
is
yeah.
one of the chief parliamentary members and chief bankrollers of theirs, and he's in parliament just enjoying his time. So yes, cronyism and corruption.
It doesn't stop, and it's very in your face. And so I want to mention that both Pashinyan and his partner Anna Hakobyan were again in the news last week, and this was one of our topics which we want to discuss, but there's no time. They were in the news for their antics and their shenanigans. We read on Friday, today is Wednesday, May 28th, but last Friday we read that the Armenian Commission on Prevention of Corruption was investigating Pashinyan for one of the recent rounds of threats and other offensive remarks he made at MPs in the parliament. He said things like he'll throw everyone in the opposition in the cellars of the KGB, that they should be hanged, they should be expelled from parliament, that he's going to make sure that they are all jailed. He called one of the opposition MPs, Seyran Ohanyan, a moron. And that's not all. There was a lot more. We're not
Yeah.
going to go through everything. His cronies, of course, Alen Simonian, said
Yeah.
that the opposition should apologize to Pashinyan for having provoked him. And
Yeah.
personally, I think that this is actually a message to another crony, Justice Minister Anna Vartabedian, that this is what her investigation should really conclude. It's not just a thing that he's saying.
And I forget it was her or whether it was a human rights minister who was also the human rights
Anahid,
yeah,
the
ombudswoman.
ombudsman.
They were present in the parliament during that brawl that Pashinyan instigated, and I believe she went onto podium and also, like, tried to paint the narrative that this was a
Yeah.
provoked by the opposition.
Well, now, apparently, in the nearly 0% chance that these cronies are going to find Pashinyan guilty, he would just be censured. Basically, he'd
Yeah,
be told to quit being an asshole, and that would be the extent of the action. Now, if he was
and
an opposition person, he'd be spending time in jail and
yeah.
in court for the next year or two or whatever.
What's different, really different. I mean, Pashinyan, he has these bipolar moments when he sometimes tries to appear like civilized and, then this revolutionary. But what's really different is that recently his partner, or girlfriend, or because they're not married by law, but anyway, Anna Hakopyan has been very, very offensive on social media. Basically, she posts videos of her critics and calls them things like donkey, like you're
Idiots,
nothing,
fools.
idiots. Yeah. So it seems to be like a coordinated effort to
Let
be
me add
more.
one more thing, Hovik,
Yeah.
about the Artsakhs, who are refugees in Armenia. He calls them louses, stupid, illiterate, idiotic, brainless people huddling in remote villages. That's I mean, this is the Hillary Clinton equivalent of the deplorables, basically.
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
It's
I
yeah.
interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, it's I just don't know if this is a coordinated tactic or they just had it and they're like it's a sign of desperation, basically, that they're trying to bite back. But, you know, even if the opposition is sometimes sharp, and I think that it's within the political discourse. I mean, yeah, you can call each other donkeys or whatever, but the fact that the prime minister and his wife at that level have to stoop down to insults.
Well, the
Um,
irony is that this comes right on the heels. Within a few days after, she was right in the middle of her education is fashionable campaign. She was promoting elevated dialogue, civil discourse, saying that Armenians need to become more literate, kinder, more skilled, more professional. And then she just goes into this complete tirade of bullshit. And this is the woman who hops on a plane with Pashinyan and pretends to be the first lady of Armenia. Okay. Hey, by the way, guess who came to her defense? I'll give you 5 seconds.
um, I mean, many, but yeah, I have no.
Why, yes, Alen Simonian, who said that everyone is free to respond in whatever way they want. The man who spits
How
on
on the faces of
detractors in
critics.
Yerevan.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
No, what a fine specimen of the democracy and statesmanship. Let me
Yeah.
just you know, Alan Simonian can't be beat. Okay, and before we go, I just want to also mention something about this army reform bill, which basically allows citizens to pay upwards of $62,000 to avoid military service. And it has justified public backlash. And we heard that this week it was removed from the agenda of the committee, which is good, but I don't think we've seen the end of it. Last week we talked about it with Hrant, and Hrant said that we need to focus more on technology and being more you know, bringing modernizing the army, which I agree with, but I think that this will be a terrible, terrible precedent for Armenia in terms of social equity. And essentially is the government of Armenia transforming the concept of military service from a sacred duty and an honor to a commodity, something to be bought out or bought out of, and rather than a duty shared equally by all citizens. I just can't fathom how, let's say, two guys serving in the army, one for the token 1 month period and the other like for the full 2 years, can treat each other as brothers in war. And this is going to cause many, many more problems in our society. And more importantly, I think that despite any modernization, despite any technological advances that Armenia needs to do, Armenia needs to have a strong base for mobilization because Azerbaijan is doing the same. Azerbaijan is not giving anyone like time off or for money. And we have a pretty long border with Azerbaijan to secure. So I want to express my thanks and on behalf of OSPED as well, our gratitude to all men of Armenia who have served and defended Armenia and treated it as a sacred duty. Thank you for your service.
Okay, well, that was our weekend review show recorded on May 28, 2025, Republic Day. Our guest today was Mr. Artur Khachatryan, who is an MP from the Hayastan Dashink and a member of the Armenian Revolutionary Federation, ARF Dashnak. In the past, he has held government posts such as Deputy Minister of Territorial Administration and Development, and he was also Governor of Shirag and Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you for listening to us, folks, and thanks especially for your support, which helps Groong thrive, even if Armenia's foreign policy can't decide which continent it's on. And if you like to help us keep the signal strong and our caffeine supply steady, visit podcasts.groong.org/donate and pitch in through Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee, or you can even send us thanks via YouTube. And if your budget is more confusing than Armenia's EU policy, we get it. Just comment, like, and share this episode with your friends or enemies like a leaked diplomatic memo.
Okay. I'm Aspet Bedrosian in Los Angeles.
And I'm Hovik Manucharyan in Los Angeles temporarily. Please follow us on social media. Subscribe wherever you get your Armenian news.
Look forward to talking with you soon. Bye-bye.
See you next time.